So first, I want to share a little bit of something that Tracy sent to me. She found Chado Rinpoche gave a Medicine Buddha initiation or Jainong in Seattle, Dharma Friendship Foundation, is that what it's called? On 2022, and and he gave a bit like a talk about Medicine Buddha. So there's some nice things here. So it's sort of like history. He starts with a history of the Medicine Buddha. I won't read the whole thing, but just some of the highlights. And so he talks about how one time when the Buddha was alive and he and his followers were in a place called Vaishali, a city near Patna. And one day the Bodhisattva Manjushri approached the Buddha and said to him, "At present, we are very fortunate to be able to meet the Buddha as he dwells among us. However, in the future, when the Buddha is no longer with us, we will experience great problems such as diseases, famines, political upheavals, and so on. What can we do then?" And the Buddha said, "Don't worry, because in the future there would be Buddhas on other planets who would pray especially for sentient beings on Earth." And then started talking about the Medicine Buddha. Buddha talked to Manjushri about the Medicine Buddha in the form of here he says 6 Medicine Buddhas and 7 Medicine Buddhas. I'm not sure what he means there, but anyway, a total, I think, of 7 Medicine Buddhas. They will live on other worlds far away from the Earth. And then the Buddha's followers, asked, "Can we meet them? Can they be invited here?" And when the Buddha thought of such an invitation, it took no longer than a snap of the fingers before the 7 Medicine Buddhas appeared before him, accompanied by this huge entourage of bodhisattvas and dharma protectors and so on and so forth. And he said that, in science, they say there's nothing faster than the speed of light. Is that right? The speed of light is the fastest. But according to Buddhist scriptures, light is not the fastest moving entity. For it is said that there is nothing faster than the mind. So the mind can get from one place to another very quickly. So that's what enabled the Medicine Buddhas to come so quickly. And and he's talking about Buddhist cosmology and how there's different worlds, and that's true. Western science as well. We live on one planet, in one solar system, in one galaxy, but there's so many others, and they're probably uncountable, right? They haven't really found the end of the universe. And there's these ships, I don't know, they're called not satellites or spaceships with the telescopes. And they're taking photographs. What are those called? They're satellites. And they're taking these photographs of, other galaxies and nebula and all these amazing things far, far, far away from us. So, if you just think about that, about how there's so many other worlds besides this one. And so, who knows? There could be Buddhas on those other worlds right now teaching the Dharma, right? And and they have the ability to instantly come to this world when needed. So anyway, so these 7 Medicine Buddhas came to Vaishali, and then they had a conference. I think that's what he called a conference. And during the conference, they discussed how to prevent the problems of disease, famine, political instability, and so on from occurring in the future. And so, yeah, so then, so that can give us some assurance. Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha isn't in this world anymore, but that doesn't mean there are no enlightened beings that can come and help us. We need to have faith. We need to have, sincere aspiration. But it said that if we pray to the Buddhas, and they're already here, we just don't have the karma to see them. So, yeah, so there are Buddhas, enlightened beings, who can be here with us to help us with the difficulties we face. And so he said, um, because the word medicine is part of the name of the medicine Buddha, we associate the practice of this meditational deity with the prevention or removal of illness. The practice, however, does not only serve this purpose, since it is also highly effective in counteracting famines, political conflicts, and other external and internal problems. And he also talked about how in the history of Tibet, it was a practice done by Tibetan kings. And he also said, in Western countries, presidents and prime ministers place their hand on the Bible when they're sworn into office. In Tibet, a text that was afforded similar importance and trust, and also very likely used when taking an official oath, was a text on the practice of the medicine Buddha called the 800 Sets of Discourses, written in ink made of gold. And he also talked about how in Japan it was a practice done by some of the Japanese emperors, and it's also very well known in China as well. So anyway, I just wanted to share that nice little story. Okay, so then to continue with what we were discussing this morning, we started looking at anger and the disadvantages of anger. And I remembered a story told to me by someone, a Buddhist practitioner, but I think this may have happened to her prior to when she started learning Buddhism. So she said there was a time when she and a friend had a falling out and were really, really angry at each other and stopped all communication with each other. And they lived in the same town, but somewhat, not like right next door. So they just stopped seeing each other, stopped communicating with each other. And then one day she realized that even though they were having no interaction, no communication, she was just thinking a lot about this friend, ex-friend, now enemy, and feeling a lot of anger towards her. And it occurred to her that, uh, when we're angry at somebody, we want to hurt them. We want them to suffer. But she realized that her anger wasn't harming this other person because they were having no interaction, no communication. But it was harming herself. The anger she was holding onto in her mind was making her suffer, keeping her mind in turmoil and pain and suffering. And so she thought, why am I doing this to myself? So that's really powerful, yeah, to realize that we're probably the number one victim of our own anger. Yeah, we're making ourselves suffer by holding on to anger, resentment, grudge holding, all these negative thoughts. And, people might say, well, I can't help it. But actually we can. I mean, there are alternatives. That's what we're going to be looking at now. But there are other things we can do with our anger rather than just letting it circle around and around and around, let our mind go around and around in circles with these negative thoughts, angry thoughts and feelings. Yeah, there are alternate choices. So, once we learn those, then we do have a choice. It usually takes a while to unlearn anger. That's something we're very good at, very familiar with, very habituated to. So it takes a while to unlearn that habit and then learn other habits, other ways of dealing with situations. But the more we do it, we just have to keep trying and practicing, and eventually that gets easier. And then the old habit of being angry and holding on to anger becomes, less strong. And then it just becomes so much easier and more natural to do these uh, other ways of thinking, alternate ways of thinking. So, let's see, where am I? Oh, yeah, something else I wanted to mention too when working with anger or any of the afflictions is the importance of having an attitude of self compassion and kindness and patience, because sometimes and again, this may be a habit we have from the earlier part of our life, we may have the tendency to feel guilty, ashamed, self critical, self hateful. Yeah, when we see anger, we may think, I shouldn't be like this. This is wrong. This is bad. I'm bad. Beat, beat, beat. um, and that doesn't help. So, again, that's a habit that may take time to unlearn, but at least notice it. Yeah, like in my own case, it took me years before I even realized I was doing it. It was such a long term habit, and I didn't even notice it for a long time. But when I did, it was like, oh, yeah, this isn't good. But it's hard to break that habit. But at least if we can notice it happening, notice these thoughts of self criticalness, self judging, self hating, and self loathing, all those kind of things. Just notice them and try not to feed them, not let your mind get stuck in those, but realize that, I mean, here we are trying to work on anger, trying to overcome anger, and here we are being angry at ourselves. So it's like contradictory. We deserve love and compassion and forgiveness just as much as others do. So we also, when we're working on cultivating those positive states of mind, love, compassion, patience, forgiveness, and so on, we need to extend them to ourselves, include ourselves in them. It does, again, take time, but at least recognize that as um, something we need to do. So let's start looking at antidotes to anger. So first, I like to talk about what I call a middle way of working with not just anger, but any afflictions, any disturbing emotions, because there's two ways that people tend to respond to the arisal of emotions in their mind that aren't helpful. And so it's good to be aware of these, look out for them, try to avoid them, and follow a middle way. I like to call it a middle way between these two unhelpful ways, like two extremes. So one is suppressing. So that's when there's anger there in the mind, but you push it down, shove it under the carpet, try to pretend it's not there. Anyone ever do that? Okay. Probably everyone It's at least sometimes everyone does that. So it's good to be aware of that, and I think it can also help to look into why. Why do you do that? Why are you doing that? And different possible reasons might be that maybe in our upbringing, in our family, in our culture, in our society, in our religion, and so on, we are told that certain emotions are bad, are sinful, are negative. And we don't want to have those. Oh, no, no, no. I'll go to hell if I think that way. And so, yeah, we don't want to acknowledge that that is there in our mind. So there's fear. That's fear of acknowledging that particular emotion because of thinking, it's going to bring disastrous consequences. There could also be fear of the emotion itself, because anger in particular can be very strong, very destructive. And we may feel that if we give into it, we might end up being a mass murderer or something. And terrible things will happen. And so it may seem safer to just, push it down. Or we may fear what other people will think of us. Like in Buddhism, we want to be a good Buddhist. We want to be like the Buddha. He's always smiling serenely. And so we may feel, well, this is what it means to be a follower of the Buddha, always sweet and calm and peaceful and patient and smiling and never angry. So, yeah, we don't want to look like a bad Buddhist and then be judged by others, rejected by others, disliked by others. So these are just some of the possible reasons for why we might suppress. But it's good to look at that. Yeah, just explore, why do I do that? And it helps you to understand yourself better, your mind. And then also look at, does this help? Does it help to suppress it? Is that a solution? Is that a effective antidote? So I don't think it is, because it doesn't go away. It's still there, and it may come out in some other form. Like it could create physical problems, tension, stress, even illness if you do it a lot. It might even lead to mental illness. Yeah, if you're suppressing a lot of difficult emotions like anger, then you might end up being mentally imbalanced. But anyway, it's not a solution. That isn't the way to be free of anger or deal with anger. So try to recognize that. And then another way that people sometimes respond when an affliction like anger comes up is to just go with it, just get totally angry, furious, and act it out with your words, with your behavior, just do whatever you feel like doing with your mind under the control of anger. So does anyone ever do that? Again, probably everyone, at least sometimes, can't hold it in anymore. And so then look at the results of that, the consequences of that. And does that do any good? Does that help? So if we act it out with other people or sentient beings, then we'll probably hurt them, probably cause problems for them, and also for ourselves. If we do things that are non-virtuous, create negative karma, then that's creating the cause for problems in the future. Another thing too is that it can become like, the more you do it, the more you act out an affliction like that, then the more it becomes habitual. It becomes like a habit, a tendency, and then it just gets easier and easier and easier. Because I heard that in the past, maybe in the 60s and 70s, maybe the 80s, some psychologists would encourage their patients to let out their anger, right? If you're angry, let it out. Don't suppress it. It's not good to suppress it. So let it out, act it out. But then at least some of them discovered that actually that wasn't a good idea because it just increased the anger. Instead of decreasing it, it increased because it just became easier, more habitual, and so then they realized, oh, that's not good. That's not a good method. So maybe you've had your own experience of that, and you can check if that's true or not. So these aren't the only two possible ways of dealing with anger. What I consider the Buddhist way would be to, first of all, acknowledge the anger that's, when there's anger in your mind, be realistic about it, acknowledge it, don't suppress it. So in that way, we're not suppressing it, pretending it isn't there, we're acknowledging it. But then instead of going to the other extreme and acting it out, we work on it with in meditation. Meditation is a bit like being your own therapist, yeah, looking at your mind and analyzing, being your own analyst, analyzing your mind. And it's good if you have like teachings. You've heard teachings from Shanti Deva and different sources about different methods, different tools for working on your emotions, like anger, and then apply those. Yeah, bring in those methods and contemplate your anger and see if that works. And I think there are lots of different methods, and some people may feel, oh, why does it have to be so many? Isn't just one enough? But I find it helpful to have numerous methods because in certain cases, I'll try one method and it just doesn't work. And I'll try another method and that one doesn't work either. And eventually, if I keep trying different methods, I'll find one that kind of hits the spot. That is the one that really helps. So it's useful, just like with tools, it's useful to have different kinds of tools, different sizes of screwdrivers and whatnot. And you keep trying different tools and you eventually find one that works with what you're trying to do. So it's good to learn different methods, different ideas, tools for working on anger and try them out. And hopefully you will find one that helps you to solve this problem and change your mind. Because the goal in Buddhism is to bring about a change, a transformation of our mind with regard to that person or that situation, so that instead of being angry and hateful and wanting to do something destructive, we can at least be more accepting and calm and realize, it wouldn't be a good idea to show my anger in this situation. And with more work on the mind, you can even get to the point where you can turn your mind around like 180 degrees. And instead of being angry, you can have something really positive like compassion, love, the wish to help, the wish to benefit that person instead of wanting to do something harmful. So that's the goal. The goal is to bring about a change, a transformation in our mind with regard to this person or situation, so that we have a more positive, constructive, virtuous state of mind rather than anger. And you might be able to do that on the first try, but Yeah, if it doesn't work on the first try, don't give up. Keep trying. Um, Sometimes it just takes a while to kind of find the right method and bring about that change. Okay, so that's what I call the middle way. It's neither suppressing nor acting out, but acknowledging, being honest about the presence of that affliction in your mind, and then working on it within your mind, within meditation. It doesn't mean you have to sit and do formal meditation. You could go for a walk, go sit in the forest, you know, but working with what is going on in your mind, analyzing what your mind is saying about this situation, about this person, and trying to recognize where it's going wrong, where it's faulty, and then introducing more positive, constructive ways of thinking and seeing things. Then the second point here is cultivate mindfulness and introspective awareness. So the term mindfulness is quite popular nowadays, and it can have different meanings. And in fact, even in Buddhism, it does have different meanings. It's used in different contexts. In the kind of contemporary scene, it usually refers to just being present, being in the present moment, being aware of what is going on in the present moment. And that is one meaning of mindfulness. But another meaning in Buddhism, because the word mindfulness in Tibetan and Sanskrit is the same word as memory or remembering. So, in that sense, it's used to remember or keep in mind our practice. Like when you're meditating, for example, like let's say you're meditating on Medicine Buddha. So mindfulness enables you to remember and not forget that you're supposed to be meditating on the Medicine Buddha or the breath or whatever you're meditating on. So it's like remembering your object of meditation. And even if your mind goes away, gets distracted, you remember, oh, no, I'm not supposed to think about that. I'm supposed to be doing this. So it's keeping in mind, remembering your object of meditation. And it can also mean remembering things like precepts that we have taken. So if you've taken the precept to not kill and so forth, not steal, then keeping that in mind, remembering I made that promise, I made that vow to the Buddha. So even in a situation where maybe in the past you would have killed a mosquito that lands on your arm, but you remember, no, I promised not to do that anymore, and then stop yourself from doing that action. So remembering precepts you have taken, remembering advice you may have received from your teacher about your practice, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and so on. So just keeping those things in mind and not forgetting them. Um, and and then, yeah, it also does have the meaning of just paying attention, watching what's going on with our body, our speech, and our mind. Just being aware, not mindless. So the term mindless means like you're acting without awareness, just kind of going on automatic. Um, so we want to watch, observe what is happening with our body, with our speech, and especially with our mind. Mainly the mind. That's the main thing we want to. that's where trouble starts. It's in our mind. So we want to watch our mind and be aware of what's going on in the mind. And then introspective awareness. Sometimes it's called vigilance, or what's another term for that? There's different translations. Huh? Clear knowing, yeah. In the Theravada tradition, they translate it as clear knowing. So um, that is a mental factor. Both mindfulness and introspective awareness are mental factors, and the function of introspective awareness is to notice if there are any afflictive thoughts or emotions, anything that's going on in our mind that is unwholesome, that is problematic, that's going to get us into trouble. So they compare it to a spy. I like the analogy of a security guard. In some banks or other kind of buildings, they'll have a security guard or several whose job is to kind of stand there and just keep an eye on what's going on and look out for trouble. And if they do see something happening, then to step in and take care of that, stop trouble from happening. So in a similar way, introspective awareness is like that. It's kind of like watching our mind and looking out for trouble, and if trouble happens, then trying to um, take care of that, apply antidotes to afflictions and so on. So those two mental factors, they work hand in hand. It's said that if we have good mindfulness, if we have strong mindfulness, then introspective awareness sort of comes as a sidekick. Like it will be there as well. And so, yeah, cultivating those two qualities. And this is something we do in meditation. It's part of the practice of meditation, because when we do meditation, whatever kind of meditation we're doing, there's always something we're supposed to be meditating on. It's not you just sit there and space out and let your mind roam all over the place, but you have something you're focusing on, the breath or a mantra or a visualization or an analytical meditation that you're doing. So there's always some main object that you're focusing on. And we're supposed to stay with that object and come back to it whenever our mind wanders away. And so mindfulness, again, plays that role of remembering what we're supposed to be doing when we're sitting there, and bringing our mind back to the object when it wanders away. And introspective awareness is what detects when there is some kind of mistake or problem in our practice, like when the mind has become distracted, or we're starting to get angry and annoyed at the person sitting next to us because they're sniffling or they're whatever. I don't know what goes on in a meditation hall. All kinds of things can go on. Or some creature outside that's making noise. And our mind is getting annoyed about that. So introspective awareness will alert us. Trouble, like a alarm going off. There's trouble happening, anger is arising, or attachment is arising, or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, the more we can cultivate those qualities, then that will help us detect anger or aversion, any type of anger that might be arising in our mind, to notice it and have this awareness. This is a problem. This is something I need to work on, and not just ignore it or suppress it. Let it go. Then next is reflect that your mind is clear like the sky, and anger is like a passing cloud. So there's this analogy in Buddhist scriptures about our mind, the nature of our mind being similar to the sky. So at certain times, the sky is like completely clear. There's no clouds or pollution, especially when you go up in an airplane. You go way, way, way up, higher than any cloud could ever reach, any pollution. It was really super clear up there. Um, and then things like anger or other afflictions or wandering thoughts, this kind of chatter that goes on in the mind, those kind of things are like clouds that temporarily appear in the mind. Well, clouds temporarily appear in the sky, but they're not permanent. They're not always there. So in a similar way, these emotions, disturbing emotions and thoughts and so on, these are like clouds in the sense that they are not permanent. They're not permanent parts of our mind, but are adventitious. They are temporary, transitory. They appear, they're there a while, then they disappear. So this can be a very helpful analogy to understand our mind and understand the nature of our disturbing thoughts and emotions, that they are just temporary or transitory. And that can help us to not take them too seriously, to not see them as permanent, because what can happen, I've noticed this in myself, and I'm sure other people have this as well, when some negative, disturbing state of mind is happening, then there's this little feeling like, oh no, it's going to be like this forever. This is never going to go away. Yeah. So, is that true? No. I mean, eventually it goes away. It might be there a few hours or maybe a few days, but eventually it goes away. So we can see, just looking at our own experience, that disturbing thoughts and emotions are not permanent. We think, look back on problems that we've had in the past where we were really angry or really totally, in love with somebody, berserk with attachment to somebody, or jealous, intensely jealous, or whatever, or depressed. But then, eventually it passed, and we can look back on that and think, wow, that was interesting. Hopefully learned something from it, but we can see that it didn't last forever. It wasn't permanent. And so the same is true for now, whatever kind of negative, disturbing, afflictive thoughts, emotions come up in our mind, they're not going to be there forever. And that itself can be helpful to get some distance from those thoughts rather than identify with them. Because there's this sort of tendency to identify, kind of an automatic tendency, like, I am that, I am anger, I am depression, I am fear, I am jealousy. And and when we do that, it sort of like feeds that emotion. It's like putting more fuel in the fire, making it stronger, and then it's harder to distance ourselves from it and transform it, work on it, get beyond it. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? So by just having this understanding that anger and so forth are just temporary mental factors, temporary states of mind, not who I am, and not permanent, that itself can just give a lot of lightness to our experiences, and can also be an effective tool for dealing with these emotions. So I know some of you have heard this story before. I hope you don't mind hearing it again. But one woman I know um, uh, heard me talk about this. Oh, that's right. So what I advise is, when you do notice an affliction in your mind, like anger, to try to just say to yourself, anger is in my mind, instead of I am angry. Right? So Just say that to yourself. Anger is in my mind, or attachment is in my mind, or jealousy is in my mind. And that's a more accurate description of what's going on, because it is just something in your mind, like a cloud in the sky. And doing that can really help us. Sometimes, just with that alone, that uh, that emotion will pass. So the story is this woman who heard me talk about that and tried it out with her teenage daughter, who would often was rebellious. And I don't know exactly what the daughter did, but she would do things that provoked her mother, and her mother would get angry and then yell at her, and didn't like that at all. We didn't want to get angry at her daughter, but she just get triggered and she couldn't help it. So the next time she was with her daughter, and the daughter was doing something, and the mother said she could see the anger starting to come up in her mind. And she said to herself, anger is in my mind, anger is in my mind, like a mantra, repeating that a few times. And she said she was able to see the anger just sort of come and go, and she didn't blow up. She didn't explode like she normally would and yell at her daughter. So that shows, and there's a few other stories like that as well, how um, this little technique, which we can use on the spot. We don't have to wait until we're sitting on a meditation cushion, but right there on the spot, when some affliction is arising in your mind, to just say to yourself, that is in my mind. And yeah, you might notice that it just passes. And even if it doesn't go away right away, at least it gives you some space to work with it, rather than just being totally overwhelmed by it and then, acting it out. Yeah, so that itself is a helpful technique when afflictions like anger arise in the mind. And and just to make a habit of that, just to develop that habit of seeing emotions like anger as just mental factors, temporary cloud-like mental factors in your mind. They're just passing through your mind and not permanent parts of you. And try to identify more with the clear, space-like nature of the mind, although that isn't easy to do. But, when you're looking, this is a nice place where you can look out and see a lot of sky, a lot of space. And sometimes just looking at its space to think, well, my mind is like that too. Not exactly. It doesn't mean my mind is blue and birds are flying through it. So, no, don't take that too literally. but but the spaciousness and the clarity of the sky, that our mind is similar to that. Okay, and then the next one is contemplate the disadvantages of anger and the advantages of patience or fortitude, which is that's the opposite of anger, being able to put up with difficult people and difficult situations without losing our composure and getting angry. And also loving kindness. Loving kindness is also like opposite to anger, because when we're angry, we want to hurt. Yeah, there's often that feeling of wanting to hurt somebody. And loving kindness and compassion are like opposite to that. We don't want to hurt. We want to help. We want to treat the person with kindness and with compassion. So just to compare those different states of mind, and try to recognize that anger just, is really painful for you, but also painful and problematic for others. It has all those other disadvantages. And then on the other hand, those positive qualities that we all do have. We all have patience. We all have loving kindness. We all have compassion. We sometimes lose them temporarily, but they always come back. So we do have those experiences. We know what they're like. And so we can look at how it feels when we are patient, when we do feel love and kindness and compassion. And then we can compare. And hopefully we will feel convinced that we want to have more of those positive qualities and less of, anger. Okay, any questions about those? This is just a few antidotes. There's a lot more, but any questions so far about any of those? Or comments, yeah, or additions.
So with the first one, the middle way, for me, it was so helpful to get very clear about the edges, the extremes, what suppressing anger felt like, what indulging and acting it out felt like, especially in my body, so that when it started to arise, I could identify it quite quickly. And then it was easier to let go of and, apply the antidote.
Elton has his hand.
Yeah, I think I had a breakthrough last night. In my mind. Because during the discussion class, like we had 4 question posed, and like we had to think about someone who was difficult, and anyway, and the last question was to see if we are closing our hearts. And yes, I have that example in my life, and I could see that behind closing my heart is this anger that I've been suppressing for many years, being around him, and I do love this person. So yesterday, during the discussion, I realized that my heart is closed and there's nothing to do. That's it. I can't force it. It doesn't want to open. But as I was going through the notes, I was like, okay, let's apply. This is not me, and this is a temporary sickness. And in that moment, what I was seeing is that it's like an unconscious way of seeing that this state is going to be there forever. It's solid. And I was feeding this closing of the heart. And by telling myself, okay, I'm not enlightened. This is what the teaching is saying. That, my mind is like the sky. And I was also not going into extremes where I said, okay, nothing is happening, like this will go and this is nothing. I was like, yeah, there is anger, but at the same time, this is not gonna be there forever. So to work with the anger and not to get sucked in the emotion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. So you were able to see that it wasn't so permanent and solid as you thought it would be, and kind of made you more open to the possibility of changing it?
Yeah. There was more space. It's like accepting it and allowing it to also move, and now with the contemplation of the disadvantages of anger, like I would love to contemplate how patience and loving kindness is a better state than that, and apply that.
Yeah, because that reminds me, people do sometimes have this view, this is how I am, and I can't change, I'm always going to be that way. So some people do have that kind of view of themselves. Like, I'm just an angry person. I've always been angry. I always will be angry. There's nothing I can do about it. And so having that kind of view of themselves, they don't even try, right? They don't even make attempt to change. So, so that's really sad. So, it's also really important to try to, you know, think differently and see that it is possible to change. And that's why, I think it's good to look at our own experience and recognize, oh, there's times when I'm angry at that person, and there's also times when I feel love for that person. There's times when I'm happy, other times when I'm sad. So none of these states are permanent. None of these states are me, like a fixed, permanent me for all of time. But just to see how we are changing, our mind is changing, that's its very nature. So that also gives kind of a lot of opening to the possibility of change. And I mean, the whole notion of Buddha nature is just so amazing. For me, that was one of the most wonderful things when I first started learning Buddhism, that we can change. We have this potential to totally transform ourselves and get rid of all the negative parts of ourselves and cultivate all these good qualities and become just like the Buddha. I mean, that is just so wonderful, so liberating. I guess some people may not want to believe it. They may think, no way, no, not me. But if you can be open to that and think, yeah, maybe that's true, then at least it gives you a sense of possibility of change. And then you're more likely to put your energy into doing things that will bring about changes. Because if you think it's no way, I can't change, it's impossible, you won't even try. Well, that's good. Sophia.
I have one question and one comment. The question is, could you please elaborate on the relationship between humbleness, arrogance, and anger and patience? And then, but I tell you my experience to ask that question. I've noticed that being humble helped me, because before I used to believe that when there was a disagreement or something, I have to go through and we have to find a resolution or something. But now I've seen that sometimes I just have to give up. It's not the right moment to keep talking, especially if I notice things in my body or raising my voice. I know it's anger and that's not the way. So I have to be humble and say, I don't have to do this. I don't have to solve anything right now. Just give up, at least for now, or totally. So being humble helps. Also, with my daughter sometimes, or with my husband, because let's say that they don't want to do things, house chores or something like that. And then before, I thought that I had to have the last word. But now, no, I just leave it, okay, or I don't say anything, and it works because later, when they are in a better state of mind, I ask them and they do it. So it's a win-win situation. So that's the reason I'm asking that. And the comment is talking about those beings and animals, and remember that they can take the form of bridges and animals or something. I'm not saying that I have that. I'm just stating that in my house there is a cat. The name is Mia. And the cat, like most cats, sleeps all day. But
The cat, what?
sleeps.
Sleeps all day, yeah.
There are also two dogs. But when I go like, and because I'm getting angry, the dogs escape. They run. But the cat, when I'm raising my voice, the cat comes, looks at me, and she meows. And believe me, and then I said, this cat is special. So I know. When I'm raising my voice and the cat comes, looks at me directly and meows, I said, I know. I lower my voice. My daughter looked it up on the internet to see if other cats behave that way. It's a Bombay cat, like those in the Halloween, those black cats. She didn't find anything, but the cat helps me.
So maybe you have a bodhisattva cat. So the animal's behavior helps you recognize when you're starting to lose it. And then, yeah, you can't see it yourself, but when you see them behaving that way, then you went, oh. That's interesting. Yeah. And so now, what was the question? The original. Well, if we have time, I will talk about arrogance and humility. That arrogance, sometimes it's called pride. That is another affliction. So maybe I'll talk about that another day. But yeah, often these afflictions kind of intermingle. And so, yeah, if somebody has a lot of pride, a lot of arrogance, and a lack of humility, then that can cause them to want to win every argument and never lose, never give in, and so on. Never admit they're wrong, they made a mistake. Right? So arrogance can play a role in conflicts, right? So it sounds like you recognize that that doesn't help, that it's more helpful to, yeah, 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 that's good. Yeah, here in the community, we have all kinds of opportunities to. I don't know if anyone's told you about the rock tumbler. Have you heard about the rock tumbler? Where does that come from? Is that? It's not in the Buddhist teachings, is it? Anyway, you know what a rock tumbler is? Well, you get these, when you get stones from the earth, they're usually very rough, including, I don't know, not precious stones, but semi-precious stones. You take them out of the earth and they're all kind of rough on the edges. So they have this thing called a rock tumbler that you put, it's like a barrel or something, and you put the rocks in and it goes round and round and round. The rocks kind of, hit each other and they knock off the rough edges. So we have this saying that, yeah, being in the community is like being in a rock tumbler. So we kind of, bump against each other and our rough edges get smoothed. So we come out as nice, shiny gemstones. Something like that. Well, that's the idea. I mean, it takes time. But don't you think it's true over time? I mean, it doesn't happen like that. But yeah, because when you're all by yourself, if you are a hermit or you live alone, or you just stay by yourself and you don't have much contact with other people, this does happen. In Buddhist countries, sometimes people go into retreat and they just stay by themselves in a little hut or in a cave and they're just meditating, and they may get some really good experiences in meditation and maybe even think they've achieved sort of a high level of realization. But then when they leave and they come down to town and they started, mingling with people. There was this story about this one Indian yogi who did that. And he was down in the market and somebody stepped on his toe and he got really angry. And then he realized, I have to go back to the cave. So it's helpful to have interaction with other people so that we can see our rough spots, our rough edges, recognize that, we still have anger, and still have a lot of work to do to work on that and increase our patience. So in fact, in the teachings, the Buddhist teachings, it does say that difficult people are like our best teachers. People that trigger our anger, stir up our anger, are like really precious teachers for us, because they give us a chance to recognize that we still have anger and we still have more work to do to overcome that and increase patience and compassion and so on. So if you can, it's hard to really think that way, especially in the moment, in the heat of the moment. But yeah, looking back on that, that seemed to be what, I know she's not here today. On Vadya, yeah, talking about her parents. Oh, she left? Oh, her mother and father being angry and how that was a great teaching for her. So we can, yeah, look back and think that way. Okay, where's the microphone on this side? So, what was your name?
Betsy.
Betsy, okay.
So talking about the rock tumbler, I would like some tips and hints on how to deal with things that aren't all the way to like raging anger, like frustration and irritation and I mean, they're milder forms of anger, and I'm having some trouble. We keep talking about anger, and I think, explosive anger, and I don't experience that very often at all. So I'm having trouble translating it to, I do experience irritation and frustration and those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just having trouble translating it.
Well, those I see as also kinds of anger. They're low-level forms of anger, but it's still a form of anger. It's a form of feeling, I don't like this. I don't like this person. I don't like this situation. So I think that I think many of the same methods should be able to work. Maybe we haven't gotten to too many of the methods. There's other methods I'll get to later, other antidotes later. But I also experience, I usually don't kind of rage and shout and scream and break things. In fact, when I talk about being angry, people go, "What? You?" Like, but yeah, it's in there. And so it's also more like on the level of irritation and criticalness and annoyance and that kind of thing. So, but it's disturbing. I just look at how disturbing it is, especially when it comes up during meditation and your mind just can get carried away in that instead of what you're supposed to be meditating on. So just recognizing how harmful it is, how disturbing it is, and undesirable. And then, so looking at, like, trying to understand why I'm feeling this way. What exactly is it about that person or that situation or whatever that is so irritating to me? And I guess one thing I find really helpful is just to change my perspective or way of looking, way of thinking about that particular person. I'll give you one example. I won't tell the whole story, but I was living in a place where the neighbor was playing music all the time. He was a composer. And so he was playing music all the time, like, all day long. And I like silence, so I found it quite annoying. But I couldn't, tell him not to do it. That was his livelihood. So, so I just thought, okay, I have a brother who plays music, who likes to play music. And so I thought, now if he was my brother, if that was my brother playing the music, I was staying in my brother's house, and if he was playing the music, I would feel very differently about it because I love my brother and I know, oh, this is something that makes him happy and I want him to be happy and so on and so forth. And so I just told myself, this is my brother. He's my brother playing music. And that just changed it, yeah, for me. So finding some way of changing your way of thinking, your way of perceiving, your way of looking at that person or object or situation that isn't so, irritating for you. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes, that actually helps. I Yeah, I can see how. The problem is when we talk about anger a lot in meditations, it'll be, how did the other person react and how, and it isn't. It's all internal, those irritations and annoyances. So that's very
Mm-hmm.
helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then also, um, the meditations on love and compassion. I don't know if any of those have been led yet, but, getting familiar with those practices so that, for example, if somebody's behaving in a way that you find kind of annoying or irritating, you might try to think, why are they behaving this way? Yeah. You might know something about them, and maybe you know that maybe they were bullied as a child, or they had these bad experiences in life, or their conditioning, or whatever has affected them, and that's why they behave the way that they do. So just trying to understand the other person and why they behave that way, that can really help to soften the heart and not be so annoyed. And it's also, if it is like a family member or someone you're close to, it could be helpful to just talk to them, in a nice way, not in a, nasty way or threatening way, but just to say, when you do this, it's really hard for me. Just see if they may be totally unaware, that you're feeling unhappy or upset or irritated by that. So they might be considered enough to do things differently. It's worth a try. It kind of depends on your relationship and depends on the other person. But sometimes that can be effective rather than you just having to put up with it or change your mind. Oh, okay. Microphone is there.
I just had a comment in relation to what Betsy was saying, because the other day you mentioned when you were talking about anger being temporary, you likened it to getting the sniffles, or like if someone else has the sniffles, and so I kind of took that and ran with it. And earlier when I noticed myself getting like a little annoyed at something that was so small, I just told myself, "Oh, you're getting those sniffles," and then I was able to laugh at myself, and then I like wasn't annoyed anymore. So I think that might be one of my new go-tos for like that like low-level annoyance, irritation is just being like, "Are you really gonna let some sniffles ruin your whole day?" Like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thought that just popped up in my mind is, if we find ourselves feeling unhappy or annoyed or irritated by something, um, just to think about what other people in the world are putting up with. Yeah. Like, I'm making a big deal about this, and people have bombs dropping on their heads, and they're starving, and, you know, so just making that sort of comparison, this situation with what other people are putting up with, I can deal with this. So that can help to change their perspective as well. Okay, Sheldon, finally.
I think for me, I had to kind of have patience with myself. Um, really helped with a lot of my own irritation and uh, around mistakes or that I've made. like this, you know, my self-centeredness wants to make me either, you know, the lowest or the highest. You know, I'm arrogant or I can't do anything wrong. But if I give myself more patience around, I don't know, negative thoughts or actions that I've done, I mean, try to act as ethically as I can and have that mind that you know what's my motivation behind things, but be clear about that. And then if I do make mistakes, it's all right. You know, if I'm constantly beating myself up in my, you know, my subconscious about things, then I'm going to be quite irritated a lot, I think. You know, I'm not going to, it's like I need to find a base to build on with, you know, before I can start thinking of others' compassion, I have to give myself compassion.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is really important to be kind and patient, compassionate with ourselves. Also, to accept that it takes time to change. It isn't instant. Um, it's not like instant noodles or instant coffee. You know? And somebody told me they heard a saying from a psychologist that I thought is really helpful. The mind is quick, the heart is slow to follow. So I think, you know, up here or in our intellect, we can easily and quickly understand things like, oh yeah, anger has so many disadvantages, and I don't want to get angry anymore, and da 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 da. But that's not enough to actually make it happen. So our heart, we could say our habitual tendencies um, take time to change. So this is something that Tibetan lamas say a lot and encourage us to be, you know, patient. And another saying they have is that um, having negative thoughts is like rolling a boulder down a hill. You know, you just have to give it a little nudge and it will just go on its own. But having positive thoughts, positive states of mind is like pushing a boulder up a hill. So the reason for that is because our mind has been existing for a long, long, long time. It didn't just start in this lifetime at the moment of conception or sometime after. It's been existing in other lives for a long time. And all that time, we've never been enlightened. We've never been free of our afflictions. We've been actively practicing our afflictions, increasing them. And probably, we must have spent some time working on them and living ethically. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have the life that we have now. But they say most of the time we are just following afflictions, acting them out. And so the habit of having afflictions and acting them out is much stronger than the habit of going against them and being virtuous. And so it just takes time. So we just have to keep going, keep working at it, and don't get discouraged. Don't have high expectations that it's going to be quick and easy. But yeah, just keep going, little by little, step by step. And slowly the mind does change. And so, yeah, we need that perspective and patience and kindness and compassion towards ourselves, not beating ourselves up when we do make a mistake, we get angry, irritated, or whatever. Just being kind to ourselves. And because I think it's really true. They say if we can't have kindness and patience with ourselves, then it's very hard to have it with others. Because when we see other people having the same kind of faults or the same kind of mistakes or the same kind of afflictions that we have, if we're judgmental of those in ourselves, we'll be judgmental of those in others. Right? So that's an important thing to consider. If we really want to be loving and kind and compassionate and patient towards others, we have to be that way towards ourselves. So again, that's something that takes time. It's hard to learn, but slowly, little by little, we work at it. We can. Another reason why it takes such a long time is the ultimate antidote to the afflictions is the wisdom realizing emptiness. So to get rid of the afflictions so that they don't come up anymore, we need to develop that. We need to develop that wisdom, and not just in an intellectual way, but what they call a direct realization of emptiness. So that's something that isn't easy and it takes time. So so in the meantime, until we get there, until we reach that point, those afflictions will still be there popping up in our mind. But as we go on, our ability to manage them will improve, will increase. So they won't be so totally out of control. We can manage them better, deal with them better, and transform our mind into more positive states.
I was thinking about Betsy's dilemma and coming to. I was thinking like, well, I have that too. How I work with that? But it's making the case for cultivating mindfulness and introspective awareness. Because what I've come to realize when I had to start paying attention to what's triggering me is I have a should around many things. And as soon as I have should in my idea of what people should be doing or how this should turn out, then my irritation arises. And I'm the one that put that should there. But it has taken meditation and reflection to recognize that that's the story I'm telling inside myself that triggers that. I don't always catch it either, but I do know that whenever I hear a should anywhere internally or coming out of my mouth, I'm already in trouble. So those annoyances in me really come from that. My expectations around how things should be.
Yeah, that's helpful. And so it's, I was going to mention you could just kind of explore those situations where you do feel this annoyance and irritation and try to understand what's going on there, what's behind that, what's underneath that, where is that coming from, and you might discover something like that that could be changed, and that would help you. Okay, Keith.
I find, like, speaking of the shoulds, I find that I'm much more captive to shoulds about 11:30 every day and about 5:30 at night. And as soon as I eat lunch and dinner, it's like, oh, you know what? This is fine.
That reminds me something Shanti Deva says about how I don't remember the exact quote, but something like anger finds its fuel in an unhappy mind. So if our mind is unhappy, irritated, we're hungry, I have this expression, hangry, right? We're uncomfortable, we're not getting something we want, whatever, there could be something that's causing us to be unhappy. So when we're in that state of mind, it's much more likely for anger to come up. And so this is actually another method, is to watch our mind with mindfulness, introspective awareness, and just notice when you're starting to feel unhappy, irritated, dissatisfied, then that's a danger. That's like, starting to walk into quicksand. So back off or do something to change your state of mind and put yourself into a more positive state of mind, like just thinking of some good thing that you have in your life, or rejoicing, or, there's little techniques that can just help you to change from an unhappy, dissatisfied state of mind to a more happy, satisfied state of mind. And then that can save you from a bigger problem of getting angry. Have a snack. I have a whole snack counter over there. Well, I don't really have time to get into another topic, right? We have to end at 4, right? Any last question or comment or story or something to share? Selden. I have to pass the microphone back.
Thinking about changing my minds around things. When I got here, year before last, there was a visitor here that just drove me nuts. You know it all, wanted to, try and explain and teach me about everything he was doing, and but then I don't know, it was about 6 months maybe, and the same visitor came back, and I had worked on myself a lot, and then I didn't have to take on that stuff onto myself, and then we became quite friendly, and I changed my mind around him. He didn't do anything different. He was the same person, but I worked with my mind. So, person that drove me nuts, I was quite happy to be around. So, yeah.
Yeah, I had that experience with the turkeys. No, really. When I first came here, I mean, I thought they were interesting, but then they started mating season, right? Oh my God. They really love hanging around down there where I live. And the gobbling, early in the morning, late at night, all day long. But I've been working on my mind. They're still around and still making those noises, but now I feel fond of them and laugh at them.
Didn't you also get triple paned windows in your new cabin?
Yeah, but it doesn't keep out the noise completely. It does help, but no, the most important thing is changing your mind. And yeah, I mean, we have so many beautiful techniques for cultivating kindness, compassion, love, thinking of other beings as having been our mothers, and so on and so forth. And even when they annoy us, they are like our teachers of patience. And so those techniques really do help. It may take a while, but yeah, they do help. And there's these stories about the Tibetans who were put into prison and beaten and tortured, even though they didn't commit any crimes. They were just lamas or monks and nuns and so on, or noble people. And I mean, of course it was horrible, but they used the teachings that they had received to meditate on compassion. And there's one amazing story about this lama who had, I don't know, 20 years or something in prison, and came out and saw the Dalai Lama and said, the danger he faced when he was in prison was losing his compassion. That's what he considered to be a danger, not losing his life, but losing his compassion. So that story, I'm kind of shortening it, but it's really amazing. So it just shows how if we really learn about these methods, contemplate these methods, really have the wish to practice these methods and work on them to the best of our ability, even in situations like that, it's possible to keep in a positive state of mind.